so that we can hear. The decision that is gathering us this afternoon will revolve around a topic that is of importance of Côte d'Ivoire. The topic is about the restoration of degraded cocoa landscape. Especially, what we want to do this afternoon is to focus on the lesson learned from the experiment of Côte d'Ivoire. What we've noticed from the onset, everybody must be aware of that, over the 50 years, the forest cover has reduced drastically. We are at around 3 million trees right now. Among the causes, the root causes, agriculture is one of the root causes of the degradation, and in Côte d'Ivoire, cocoa culture is pointed out as one of the reasons of destabilization of the forest. And to this factor, there is also the fact that the land used for the cocoa culture are more and more degraded. And for Côte d'Ivoire, we have two major issues that are intertwining. We have the challenge or the ambition of development, and the country has set an emerging plan for the 15 coming years. And to be an emerging country, you need to have a strong economy, and cocoa is an important element of the development of Côte d'Ivoire. I'm not going to come back on the figures. It represents 50% of the GDP of the country, and it creates a job opportunity for around 1 million people and around 6 to 7 million in the value chain. So there is this economic stake, and there is another one, which is the preservation of the environment, including the healthy character of the soil.
I don't hear you.
There are lots of effort have been developed in the past, and I think we have solutions to the challenges we are facing. Here today, we are here to talk about the solution that you would like to share in order to solve the issue we are facing. Nowadays, we know that many initiatives have been put in place, and many partners at the international and national stage have worked together hand in hand. And the side event that we're organizing today has the purpose of focusing on the lesson learned from these initiatives. So we're going to organize this panel in two big steps. We are going to hear the general overview or the approaches on how to tackle land degradation issues. We have two guests. First of all, we are going to hear Mr. Kwame Joseph. He's an engineer. He's a director of Department Cocoa and Coffee and other stimulant plants at FIRCA. For those who don't know, the FIRCA is an interprofessional fund for research and cocoa board. He's going to talk about a topic, a landscape, a sound landscape for the development of agriculture field. So it's a broad thematic, and it's focused as well on cocoa. And we are also going to hear Mr. Asamoah Yapo. He's going to talk about the initiative Cocoa Forest from the Ministry of Water and Forest. On the second stage of the meeting, we're going to move to another group of panelists. They are experts, and they're going to talk about the results in terms of action led in terms of land degradation control and restoration. Afterwards, we are going to have some discussion. so that at the end of this meeting, the purpose is to come out of this meeting with a clear overview of what is being done in Côte d'Ivoire and what we will have to do on the short and medium term. I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Kwame Joseph. He's going to start his presentation, which will talk about the sound landscape for the development of agriculture in Côte d'Ivoire. Mr. Kwame, you have the floor. Thank you, Professor. I hope you can all hear me despite the warm. Before starting, I'm going to present within 15 seconds what is FICA. It is an professional board for the development of agriculture, which is a structure which is focusing on the financing of the cocoa board and research and agronomy research. It is an initiative drawn up from the consultation with the different agricultural sector. If you want to have more information on FIRCA, you can go to the website. Since we don't have much time, we only have 10 minutes, www.firca.ci. To talk about the topic which gathered us today, as the professor said, I'm going to present a global overview of the contribution of the different cocoa, different culture, different crops in the development of the environment. As Professor said, agriculture is pointed out as a main factor of land degradation, which involves its implication on the climate change that we are facing. Yet, agriculture is the main victim. So, facing this contradiction, it is good to deepen the reflection and the diagnostic in order to find adapted solution. Because if we see only agriculture as are they only responsible for the degradation of land and climate change, the solution that will be brought wouldn't be suitable. For a sustainable development, agriculture sectors need a sound environment. So agriculture has a double challenge of productivity and preservation of the environment, because we have to live, and to live we need food, and so agriculture must continue to provide us with food. And at the same time, agriculture must be carried out by preserving the environment. I would like to say that the agricultural sectors that contribute to the FIRCA understood that the issue of the environment is of utmost importance. So since 2004, all the sectors have taken the initiative of agriculture as an important aspect, because the issue of environment must be taken into account in all the sustainable development programs. So since 2004, all the programs that we've developed with the agricultural sector is being done under the sustainable development. Afterwards, when FIRCA demonstrated capacity to develop and manage funds, other partners, development partners, which came to support the agriculture sectors, have put an emphasis on the development of the environment and the basis. What are the different orientations given by the agriculture sectors whenever FICA was about to finance a program? The first thing, the different sectors keep in mind the different schedule for planting and into the context of climate change. They insist on the development of different variety that are resilient, and they also insist on the sustainable management of the diseases and other crop diseases. And you're aware that 50 years ago we didn't know some disease, especially in the cocoa sector, but recently we have seen that some new diseases are appearing and affecting the cocoa sector. And all the sectors require FIRCA to find some new solutions to fight and to combating the diseases. There is also the issue of sustainable management of soil and agroforestry as an essential tool or as an essential approach which allow us to protect to better protect the environment. And the last aspect is a good management of pesticides in order to guarantee sound food for consumption. For the implementation of the different programs, FIRCA has adopted since 2015 to better include the issue of gender and environment. FIRCA decided to adopt a dedicated sector to the environment sector. So a policy based on social and safe and sound environment and social politics has been developed and included in all the programs. So facing the convergence of the different action of the sectors, how the solidarity among the sectors and the synergy among the sectors can affect and can positively affect the contribution of funders for the development of the sector of the agricultural sector. The second element, so investment are being done hand in hand from the different donors. What does it mean? If I take, for example, the CNRA benefits of investment in the different labs. All these equipments must be mutualized. If another institution, for example, let's say the Abu Jami University has a project which requires the use of these labs, the fact that these labs was funded by the cocoa culture sector and let's say the AVR sector wants to use the labs, they can benefit from the instrument for the tools that have been implemented there. The second thing is the mutualization and the sharing of the lesson learned. You know that we have specific sectors, but they are facing common issues. When the result is found in one sector and it can be shared with the other sector, we're not going to ask them to do the same experiment. One example, today the Cocoa Culture Board is financing the mapping of the different zone of production of cocoa and coffee. This same zone of production is the same zone where the AVR, the palm trees are being implemented there. So this base study, so the results of this study can be used by the different sectors. Let's say the palm tree sector needed the same study, so after discussion, this sector must focus on the aspect that were not touched during the study led by the CNRA on cocoa and culture and coffee. So this is how we can mutualize the results. The third element is information and sensitization. When we identify an issue and this issue can affect the other sector, this issue is shared with the whole sectors. If there is a synergy of action among the different sectors, we can amplify the impact of the action on the preservation of the environment. I cannot conclude my presentation without giving you some examples. We are focusing on some specific actions. For example, there is a capacity building of the agro-meteorological parks. The strengthening of these agro-meteorological parks allow us to get more fine-tuned information that will benefit all the institutions of research and generate information for the whole sector and for all the farmers. The second item is the introduction and the selection of new vegetal materials that are more performant. We know all the results on the cocoa sector. There is a sector, the result of this cassava sector, and we have adopted. You have some adaptation in the rice sector as well. There is an optimal management of the environment in the intensive production sector. So this is the desert banana. You know, the intensive production of banana desert use lots of inputs, fertilizers. So this study allows us to take into account the environmental impacts on the production, the intensive production of banana desert. You also know that there is an issue of the promotion and sustainable management of oil and soil. It's the case of the leguminosas. There is adaptation of the cultural calendars. This is one of the expectations of the different sectors, and we have to provide some solutions on the rice and cocoa sector. I gave you the example of the mapping of soil because a vast study is being carried out by the CNRA. We are going to talk about it today. probably, but I'm going to skip this part. Another example is the promotion of alternative energy, of firewoods with the use of biomass, and these are technologies that were developed in another context of other studies developed by FECA and Agroforestry. Some models have been developed for the association of some forest products in order to ensure reforestry and the use of the forest for self-sufficiency. There is a study of the sequestration of carbon through the use of AVR. There was a discussion in one of the rooms today because everybody is talking about the cultures that contribute to the degradation of the environment. But without this study, you would think that AVR is contributing to. We would think that AVR would contribute to the degradation of the environment. So this study demonstrates that the sequestration of CO2 is also important as the forest trees. They also demonstrated that between 10 and 15 years, this sequestration is more important. I didn't do this study, it was already presented elsewhere, I'm not going to come back on it. What can we draw as lesson? Today, the production of cocoa is mostly pointed out as for its negative impact on the environment. And we must be very cautious because it is true, cocoa generates lots of resources. Cocoa has an important place in terms of superficie in Côte d'Ivoire, but the plantations are already there. The reflection must be oriented on how to better manage the plantation that exists by introducing new systems that ensure the sustainability instead of thinking of sanctions that would affect some plantations that were made a long time ago. So this way or this road would be suicidary because if you put a sanction on some plantation, the farmers will not focus on the plantation. He will do something else, and by doing something else, he will contribute to the degradation of the environment. So this issue needs more reflection. So beyond the development of the different sectors, agricultural sectors, at the level of FIRCA, they take into account the dimension of diversification. I would like to end by saying that the sound environment calls for an integrated approach for the exploitation of the agricultural sector based on the diversification of the different cultures and the source of revenues for the farmers. By doing this, the farmer could better manage his revenues. This is the example I gave. I focus on the example of cocoa, but it can be another culture, another crops. So if you sanction the farmer, he will decide to do something else. And if he's not supported to do that other thing, maybe his action would have a more devastative impact on the environment. So this is the end of my presentation, dear moderator. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kwame. If you can sum up quickly.
Le FIRCA est prêt pour le combat pour la lutte contre les effets négatifs du changement climatique. Et le FIRCA nous a rassuré ici que toutes les filières aujourd'hui sont conscientes du fait que cet enjeu existe et ils exigent dans le cadre de leurs projets, des projets qu'ils financent, que ces éléments soient pris en compte. On a aussi retenu qu'il y a un service dédié à l'environnement au FIRCA, donc il y a un guichet auquel on peut aller souscrire lorsqu'on veut avoir des activités de recherche ou bien de développement concernant les problèmes d'environnement, en particulier ceux de la dégradation des sols. Le FIRCA nous a aussi appris ici qu'il y a une solidarité entre les filières qui permettent de mutualiser un certain nombre d'acquis et ça permet de bonifier les investissements qui sont faits de part et d'autre. Alors, donc, et puis on a eu droit à beaucoup d'exemples qui démontrent l'impact que le FIRCA a. Alors, on va passer maintenant à l'autre présentation qui va être faite par M. Assamoah Yapo. Et alors, avant que...
I will quickly talk about Mr. Asamoah Yapo. Mr. Asamoah Yapo is one of the most experienced engineers. Those who have done agriculture in Côte d'Ivoire will certainly know him. He's been on the field for more than 30 years. He spent more than 15 years in the field of cocoa, so he knows that sector very well. He also worked in the field from 1980 to 89. He worked on the reform also up to 92. He also has experience in forestry. He worked in the forest for the reform of the sector between the year 97 and 99. He's an engineer. He did the school ENSA. He then specialized with a Master of Science in economy in the state of Mississippi. So he's been in the US, he's got some experience. We'll now give him the floor so he can tell us about the Cocoa Forest Initiative.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le modérateur.
Thank you very much, Chair. The truth is that I learned from all of those who are around this table, so I am still learning today. Today, the presentation will focus on experience sharing and lessons learned in the context of the implementation of the Cocoa Forest Initiative. There's a PowerPoint presentation. I believe it's on the screen. We'll quickly talk about the context. It's worth noting that the facilitator knows a lot. He said that in 2020 we had 2.9 million hectares of forest, according to a study that was conducted by the Ministry of Waters and Forestry. And we all know, like the facilitator said, that cocoa farming is one major factor of deforestation, even though there are other factors. You also know that we are the first cocoa producer, but we're not consumers of cocoa. Our cocoa is exported. Hopefully, the consumers that are in the field of cocoa early on were aware that actions need to be undertaken to reduce the impact of cocoa farming on the forests. In 2017, under the leadership of Prince Charles, 37 companies in the field of cocoa and chocolate committed with the two major producers in West Africa, namely Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. They signed a strong agreement to work against deforestation in the value chain of cocoa. That was the first goal. The Cocoa Forest Initiative, which is a result of that commitment, is a platform for a public-private partnership. What are the main topics that are addressed by this initiative? There are three main issues. Next slide. I am summarizing, I'm not reading the slides. So the third topics are as follow. The industry committed to restore the forest. They committed to promote sustainable cocoa, as the expert from FIRCA explained earlier. In addition to that, they committed to promote agroforestry, since we're talking about deforestation. And then, since we're working for the the community and producers in the community, they worked on, or they committed to promote social inclusion. Some flagship activities were undertaken in the first component, and it has to do with implementing a monitoring system, a system to monitor the forest. There are several activities, but I believe that one is extremely important. One other major action in the cocoa production is to implement a system to trace the cocoa production. On the social component, the action is to make, or to deploy some efforts to better support the local community so that they take part in the actions that I mentioned. What were we able to get from the actions that have been undertaken since 2018? I first mentioned that this initiative is a public-private partnership. So its purpose is to capitalize on the achievements or what is being done by the various stakeholders. So the results that I'm going to mention are results of the partners, but one main result is related to the trust. Some entities were established. A steering committee has been established in other bodies. These help to build trust. Another result that has to do with the actions undertaken by ministries, namely the Water and Forest Ministry, is to have a regulatory and political framework with incentives to encourage investment in those areas, forest, restoration of the forest, agroforestry, etc. Another result, a third one, I'm not going to list them all, I'm talking about the main ones. We need to raise awareness among the farmers, make sure that communities are also aware so that there's no longer resistance to change, and so that they adapt good practices. I believe that awareness-raising campaign bear fruit. I was at the board of cocoa and coffee, and it used to work differently. Today, most of the companies that work in the chocolate industry have a service dedicated to agroforestry. Some of them have a center for production of forestry. And this is a challenge that we need to meet. So the various companies undertook agroforestry activities. From 2018 up to date, they planted 13 million forest trees in the cocoa farms. It's extremely important. I also want to mention the action of the board of cocoa coffee when it comes to agroforestry. So based on the available reports, the board has planted 3.5 million trees in those areas. So that's the result of the awareness-raising campaign. I talked about 35 companies. We're talking about deforestation, but it's not the chocolate companies that go there and cut down the trees. It's not them, but they are aware of the positive impact of the forests. That's why they are committed. But in the concrete implementation of preservation of the forest, those companies are the ones that in higher number committed to the restoration of the forest. And the main companies, I can mention them: Ara, Cavalli, Coindebe, Rapid Gras. Those are companies in the field of cocoa. they committed themselves to those actions. Another activity that is worth mentioning and which is being executed by the Coffee Cocoa Board, which is an active member, it is the current establishment of the traceability system, the tracking system. I can establish. I only have 2 minutes left, so I'll move on to the lessons learned. I cannot mention all of the lessons learned, but I'll mention 2 or 3. The first one is that agroforestry is possible in Côte d'Ivoire. The condition is first to have the trees in quality and quantity, to have incentive measures to encourage people to adopt it. Second lesson, I would say, have to do it in a few words: trust, consultation, and capitalization of the results. That means looking for synergy of actions of all our partners. And the third lesson is that for change, or rather that change has a cost, and we need availability of financial resources for that change to happen. The major challenges stem from what I mentioned earlier. But I will talk about one main challenge that the initiative did not properly address. It is having a holistic approach. Dr. Kwame said it very often. It is an approach where we target various basins and various sectors. Cocoa is not the only one that is concerned. There's also the palm oil sector and the rubber sector. Another challenge is the establishment of a national system for monitoring and early warning system. Such a system will allow Côte d'Ivoire to comply with the requirement of the European Union project on deforestation. That project is ongoing. If you do not know all those requirements, if you do not have that system, you cannot know where your cocoa comes from. The last challenge still has to do with financial resources. That is a prerequisite. What is next? And it's related to the challenges. In Côte d'Ivoire, there are a number of partners that committed, but it's necessary to have a synergy of action. There's the World Bank, there are other actors, there is the initiative of the European Union with the strategy of sustainable cocoa. If there is no synergy of action, all the resources will be deployed, but there will also be drawn in that flow of actions. But before I conclude, I want to ask a question. Cocoa, indeed, but it's not only about cocoa. Yes, there's a relationship between cocoa and the forest. But why don't we talk about farming, generally speaking, and forest? Because we can no longer continue to farm without taking into account the forest. Thank you.
Beaucoup, Monsieur Assamoah. J'avais oublié le terme.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asamoah. After Fika, we were told that the agro-industrial sector is also committed to fight deforestation and to contribute to rehabilitation of or restoration of the degraded land. That is good news. And just like Firka said, they are establishing some bodies to make sure that the initiative, the Cocoa Forest Initiative, can work. Maybe we can summarize this in one sentence. Agroforestry is very much possible in Cote d'Ivoire. There are some positive signs that show that this can be done, but some conditions need to be met. I'll also mention the challenges. One challenge that was mentioned by FECA and also mentioned here is the holistic approach. We need to have an integrated approach that takes into account all of the sectors in agriculture as a whole. There's also a national monitoring system that needs to be established, because a solution starts with prevention. Even when it comes to health, prevention is more efficient when we want to tackle a health issue. So it's the same here with the health of our forest and our soil. So such a system needs to be put in place. And of course, as always, we need to mobilize resources. So the key message here is the synergy of action, because we can see it on the field. There are a number of initiatives, sometimes micro initiatives that show that some things are possible, can be done and be done well, but that remains at a very small scale. So it's difficult to appreciate the impact. And a synergy should bring a stronger impact of those actions. And why don't we have an agriculture-oriented initiative, an agriculture forest initiative? Because it's agriculture as a whole that is concerned by that issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Asamoah. I do not know if we will allow for questions. Maybe we'll continue because we have lost 15 minutes. So we'll continue with the second panel, and we will give a round of applause to the current panel members.
On va faire des débats qui seront ouverts.
We'll then have an open discussion, and questions will be addressed to any panel member. So we'll now have a technical panel. I will now call Dr. Christophe Kwame, Country Manager of ICRAF Côte d'Ivoire. I'm also calling Henriette Valls from GIZ Côte d'Ivoire. She's in charge of the project Green Center for Innovation. You know, she works on many initiatives. I'm also calling Mr. Patrice Awadogo from FAO. And Mr. Yves Koulou, who's in charge of the Cocoa for Generation program.
Alors, donc, tour à tour, je vais donner la parole à ces différents intervenants pour qu'ils nous...
I will give the floor to the panel members so that they can tell us about the activities they have undertaken in restoration of the soils. So the first one to take the floor is Dr. Christophe Kwame, who has gathered us here today. And as I mentioned, he's the country manager of CI4. For those who do not know it, it is the Center for International Forestry Research. He's an agronomy engineer. He is also a farmer. He has a PhD. He has worked for a long time with us at CNRA. He now holds an international position. The main topic he works on is agroforestry, but he focused on cocoa. Mr. Kwame, you now have the floor. Thank you very much, facilitator. With your permission, I would like to stand.
Donc, je n'ai pas besoin de te donner le temps. Hein? Tu connais le timing. Hein?
You know how much time is allotted to you, right?
Oui, merci, monsieur le modérateur.
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to start by saying thank you. Thank you for staying here in that humid heat, just like a cocoa tree is under the sun. Did you know that in the past the cocoa tree was called the food of God, or the fruits of the gods? It was so good. It was giving them so much benefits that it was called the fruit of God. And I believe that Côte d'Ivoire benefited from those this benefit, because before the independence and around the independence, so many people were able to go to school thanks to cocoa farming. To the industry, that was also a benefit, because their turnover today is $47 billion that the cocoa or chocolate industry would produce. For most of the people who, it's also giving a benefit for those people who like the chocolate products. But today, the climate evolution and the way of producing is threatening our cocoa production. Can you imagine a day without chocolate? I believe my friends will not be able to bear it. So we need to act, because if we do not act, we might be in a world without chocolate. So I've come here to share the experience and the lessons that we've learned in our attempt to change the way we produce cocoa. At Sci4, we addressed the restoration under the or in the context of agroforestry to protect the soil, to diversify our sources of income, and also agroforestry for a more sustainable and resilient cocoa in the face of the changes we observe in the environment. And in the specific context of Côte d'Ivoire, agroforestry to mitigate the risk of the swollen shoot disease, which is the main threat of cocoa farming in Côte d'Ivoire. The purpose is to have a sustainable production of cocoa so that tomorrow we can continue to have some chocolate on our tables, and for the farmers to continue to have a reliable income for such a crop where they decided to invest. The lessons we want to share with you for this panel, there are 4 lessons we want to share with you. Based on our experience on the field, the first lesson is the need to engage with the stakeholders. When we want to do agroforestry, that means that the tree will be taken into account, and if the farmer does not take or is not willing to plant that tree, we will not make any progress. So from the start, we need to engage the stakeholders and also the technical partners. In Côte d'Ivoire, there's a good partnership amongst the research entities. So this is something we need to encourage. And then we need a convergence between governance, policies, and all of that. The second lesson has to do with the need to adapt the technology with the research and the area. What works in Kumasi in Ghana might not work in San Pedro, Ghana. So we need to take into account the local concerns. If you want to use some trees, you need to know that based on the crops, based on the origin of the tree or the producer, they have some preference for some type of trees. This will also give us a table that I like a lot because our friends from ANADER and CNRA worked on it. We need to start from a diagnosis that ANADER calls a participatory diagnosis. That allows us to take stock of the landscape we want to improve, taking into account the level of degradation. Based on the causes of the degradation, we might make suggestions on options for restoration that will take into account the reality on the field. So then once that solution is selected, we need to monitor so that at the end of the day, we see if we've reached the expected target. Third lesson. Today, when we talk about degradation, when somebody is interested about carbon, they'll start, the entry point will be carbon, another entry point will be climate, but we need to tackle the root cause of that degradation. And there's the fact that the soil is becoming poor, the need to have the trees to support, and there's also the incentive. What would encourage a farmer to do that? And then the social benefits. What is the benefit for the community? So we need to document all of that to make sure that there's commitment from all stakeholders. Now, in the policy where we remove the trees and we replant them, we conducted a test. That is the far right picture. Once we remove the trees, we analyzed the soil. The colors show in red that the soil is not really deep. This is not good for the cocoa. What is gray is that there's a lot of sand in the soil. That is not good. And then what is blue is also not good for the cocoa. It's hydromorphic soil. So we need to plant the cocoa where all risks or other risks are removed. So then we can make a recommendation so that they use properly the soil. So we identify the landscape and we give higher chances for the cocoa to develop where it's appropriate. There's then the swollen shoot disease. It's something that is scary that is scaring us. It's something that you can compare to malaria, the disease given by the mosquitoes, because there is a vector that spreads the disease. The various research showed that if your farm has been attacked within 5 years, everything is destroyed. So we need to take actions to mitigate this while we look for a more resistant variety. Now, economic incentive. Many people want to get into the field of cocoa. Not everyone can produce the seeds. We can have some specialists that grow the plant and then go on the field to plant them. So we noticed that we conducted the experience with young people, and we noted that most of them, 40%, had 3 to 4 times the lowest income or the regulatory income. So we need to encourage them. The next slide is showing the necessary element for the community.
We want to associate trees because we want the agroforest trees can benefit the population. There's the fruit trees, there's the fertilizers. We need to have all these specificities, and the product of this diversification have to be proven to be useful for the food beyond what is being able to diversify. So it is important to tackle the issue at the grassroots. The last lesson, we come back to the fundamentals of planting trees. It is not enough to plant trees. We have to make sure that the tree that we plant can grow. We have to make sure that we plant and we forgive it. We have to put everything in place to make a follow-up system so that 2, 3 or 4 years later we can draw the benefits and show the benefits to the landscape for the CO2 fixation. If we plant and we do not follow, we will not be able to measure all the other elements. So we have to keep in mind the fact that it is good to plant, but we have to make sure that the tree is growing and developing in a sound environment. Just to quickly end my presentation, we think that the cocoa landscape can be restored. Mr. Yapo said it previously, and I'm glad to hear that we have all the necessary resources to restore the forest. It is important to keep that in mind and adopt the way forward so that at the end of the day, we are able to continue the work of production of cocoa, which makes our country the first producer worldwide. So the key factors of success, quickly, we think that for development, innovation is key. This innovation is what the farmers are bringing up, the researchers, the development agents. Innovation is a new way to do something differently. So it means that we all have, whether we are in the village or in the lab, we have to make sure we provide solution by changing the paradigms on which we're working previously. The global approach in terms of ecosystem, the collaboration, research and development among the stakeholders are some aspects on which we need to work for success. Where there is a need, we need to keep training and reinforce the capacity so that we can help them to bring their efforts in the restoration of the landscape. To end, everything we're saying is good, but we need an institutional framework that will coordinate and that will make sure of the correct and serious implementation of this diversification that we're looking forward to see. So, ladies and gentlemen, these were the lessons learned that I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kwame. I think these are technical aspects. What I've been able to learn is that for those who have done some botanic, you know that the theobroma is the scientific name of cocoa. It is the drink of gods. It has many benefits and economic benefits as well. As lesson learned, what Mr. Kwame said through the implementation of the activities that were implemented on the ground is that we have to engage the different stakeholders. So this notion of coordination is coming up again. It is important, but this time Mr. Kwame emphasized that the notion has to be implemented in the framework of the technical internship, and he was explaining it through the schemes that he presented, that goes from the diagnostic through the proposals of solutions, the implication or the involvement of the rural communities, a monitoring mechanism so that we're able to assess the impacts. So all the stakeholders on the ground must work hand in hand. So this notion of complementarity, of integration can complement the notion of integration at the institutional and political level. He also demonstrated that on the ground they were able to demonstrate the positive impact of the practices, of agroforestry practices. He ended up by calling on the importance of innovations, because in research, the researchers are working and they are producing good results, and integrate them in the way of operation is key. He also insists on the collaboration among stakeholders and partners, and he ends up by saying that the institutional framework is one of the key of success. And you see that this issue is trending. The necessity to have an institutional framework that is coordinating all the aspects and which is able to approach the issues in an holistic way. So I'm not going to dwell on the comments. I'm just going to quickly give the floor to Mrs. Henriette Vols. She's working on the sustainable production of cocoa for 8 years now. She started with the UTZ, and within the framework of Rainforest Alliance, I think right now she's working on the initiative Cocoa Without Forest. Am I giving it right? Am I translating it right? Cocoa without deforestation. Cocoa without deforestation.
Madame, vous avez la parole.
You have the floor. I'm going to start. Thank you for the introduction. I work for 2 projects of the GIZ, the Center for Green Innovation, and the program for supporting the sustainable cocoa with the European Union. I would like to start by setting an overview of the different activities that the 2 projects, the cocoa project of the GIZ is implementing regarding the regeneration of the cocoa landscape. We have to say that the regeneration of cocoa landscape it is good for the German cooperation because 60% of the cocoa used in Côte d'Ivoire comes from Côte d'Ivoire. First of all, it is important to mention that the production is not contributing to more degradation of the landscape. We are working in order to prevent deforestation, and we're working on the monitoring of the degradation and with the collaboration with the communities, the rural communities. We heard a lot on agroforestry, climate intelligent cocoa production, and overall we work as well on the governance of the landscape, the collaborative governance of the landscape. It is important to have at the center the farmer, the cocoa farmer, so that he or she becomes an agent of regeneration. He or she needs the good incentives, you need a land security, possibility for investment, diversification, and a decent revenue. We cannot invest in regeneration if we do not have a decent revenue. Today I would like to emphasize the circular agriculture. First of all, I would like to say a quick word on the project. Please, next slide. The Center for Green Innovation. We work in the line Miminader in 3 regions with 150 cooperatives with the purpose of identifying and disseminate innovations that will help increase the revenues of the farmers and the turnover of the small companies along the value chain. We work in 3 value chains: cocoa, cassava, and plantain. On the circular agriculture aspect, the idea of the circular agriculture is to create 1,000 cycle of resources of raw material or the waste that can be used as a resource and minimize the loss and the external inputs. So circular agriculture can help increase the resilience of the production and the resilience as well of the producers, and reduce the emission of the waste coming from the waste, and diversify the revenues by giving value to the waste, and also prevent the expansion. Now the circular agriculture in the cocoa sector. For every ton of cocoa or cocoa pod dry, 8 tons of waste are produced. So for Côte d'Ivoire, it represents 2 million of dried cocoa pod, 15 million tons of and 600,000 cubic meter are produced. The research carried out showed that the producers leave the cocoa pod without treatment in the crop, in the fields, but they use the juice. But if we leave the cocoa pod on the tree, it can lead to an accumulation of toxic minerals. We can also use the waste as a source of energy, as compost, or transform them in subproducts. The other aspect, it is good to mention that someone has the microphone open, please.
Par le cercle au cycle de nutriments avec l'élevage et l'agroforesterie pour avoir plus de nutriments. Maintenant, nous nous sommes demandé quels sont les moyens les plus pertinents d'utiliser ces déchets dans la Côte d'Ivoire. Nous avons regardé pour le jus, l'alcool cosmétique et sanitaire, le vinaigre et le bioéthanol.
We cannot hear the speaker clearly. A video is being played. It is stopping the sound that we are receiving. We cannot provide a clear interpretation.
Une étude de l'impact environnemental.
We have led an assessment of the environmental impact, the feasibility impact, and the study of the market. Now we'll talk about the two examples, the carbonized briquette. We were thinking about the impact of different here you can see the carbon balance of the different CO2 production and the carbonized briquettes and non-carbonized briquettes comparing to the firehoods. And we can see that the non-carbonized briquettes have a negative balance and a carbon sequestration due to the fact that he prevents deforestation. On the other side, the carbonized briquettes have a higher aspect according to the
qu'on utilise pour les
that we use for the carbonization. So it has a negative balance, or a negative balance that is very negative.
The benefit to have an intelligent and precision irrigation management based on images.
Ok, je pense que ça va maintenant. Donc, prochaine slide. Après, donc, les briquettes non carbonisées ont un très bon bilan de carbone. Après, nous nous sommes demandé s'ils sont aussi comparatifs.
So we were thinking about the comparison of the price and the other source of energy. It was demonstrated that they can be compared. We are receiving a sound at the same time with the speaker. A video is being played. So on the right side, you can see an analysis. We are hearing two voices at the same time, so we cannot provide a clear interpretation because we are not receiving a clear sound. Sorry for that.
emplois. Et sur la photo, vous voyez la presse et les briquettes non carbonisées produites ici en Côte d'Ivoire. J'ai aussi une briquette là-bas sur la table. Pour les champignons, on peut aussi dire qu'il y a une forte demande au marché local. Ils sont cultivés sur un substrat composté et après la production des champignons, le substrat de compostage est encore mieux. Donc on a en fait deux produits, les champignons et le compost. Et ici on voit une analyse.
Here we can see a profitability analysis for the small companies. And we can see here that it can be profitable after 1 year and can generate 2 jobs. I would like to conclude by showing some for the training campaign that was very well welcomed, with a quoting of one entrepreneur who said, "It is a promising company that can draw some benefits." I hope that I've been able to convince you on the advantage and the capacity of this kind of activity to build resilience and reduce emission and diversify the production. And through this, let's hope that it can help us prevent expansion. Land degradation. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Madam, for your presentation. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, so we're not able to follow clearly what was presented. We'd like to keep in mind that the initiative revolves around the use of agricultural waste and everything that we can do in order to create a circular economy in the sector and the production of cocoa. And everything that they have been doing as investigation or trials demonstrate that there is a strong potential of the use of the waste to give an impulse, a good dynamic for the development of circular economy. But of course, this circular economy has a positive impact on the restoration of the land degradation and also for the improvement of revenues and globally on the reforestation aspect. So we thank Mrs. Bals. We now give the floor to Mr. Patrick Savadogo from AFAO. He's going to present some of the achievements. Shall I start? A brief presentation of introduction of Mr. Savadogo. He joined the AFAO in 2019. He's working as a forestry officer, agent de reforestation. He's a specialist. He's coordinating the aspects relating to the sustainable management of forests and the trees, as well as the restoration of landscape in the ECOWAS region. I think it's enough. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. I hope you can hear me clearly. As he said, I'm from AFAO. I'm just going to draw an overview of what we're doing. At AFAO, regarding the cocoa culture. I think the previous presenters have touched different aspects that I was about to present, so just for saving time, I'm going to skip and dive in the other slides. For a long time, FAO as an international structure didn't focus in the sector of cocoa culture, simply because our interventions are based on the request from the countries. As long as we don't have an explicit request from a country, we cannot intervene in the sector. And in 2019, FAO at the level of Côte d'Ivoire received a governmental request in order to support this cocoa sector. So the government request us to focus on these aspects. So overall, in the past, there was few intervention of the FAO around the world in the cocoa sector. Our first interventions in the country, in Côte d'Ivoire, we have been requested, first of all, on the elaboration of the project for the Green Climate Fund, You have received the manuals on the projects, and I'm not going to focus so much on them, but the first one, which is PROMIRE, which is the acronyms, has a purpose of contributing of the efforts of the country in the climate change mitigation aspect, and also build resilience through the portfolio of REDD+. You know that if the countries are ready for the REDD+, it opens opportunities for them in order to access some of the funds that are available. So these projects is aiming the development of funds. So you can see the different manuals that were given to you in order to know better the content. We have received 2 requests at the same time. The second project is a project that is funded by the GEF. So this project, as you can see, is focusing essentially on the value chain of cocoa, and also is making sure that the supply of cocoa is down in line with the maintaining of the trees in the system, whether it is in the landscape overall or in the agricultural farming setting. So it is a project that is in line with the global process of GEF, which is called FULU, which is focusing on everything related to restoration and also food system. At the level of West Africa, which is a zone that I'm covering, we have intervention in the framework of FULU at the level of Côte d'Ivoire, in Nigeria, which is focusing on the cocoa culture and the palm tree. In Guinea, we also have a project which is ongoing, which the finalization is ongoing, and we have, with the GEF, we are focusing on aspects of the...
Si vous pouvez voir un peu au niveau de cette diapositive, ce qu'il faut retenir, c'est que pour l'ensemble de tous nos projets d'intervention, c'est comment nous pouvons réaliser une transformation dans les secteurs. Donc, une transformation qui puisse assurer aussi bien la durabilité et aussi s'assurer vraiment que tous les acteurs qui sont dans ces secteurs puissent assumer leurs responsabilités, donc vis-à-vis du social, vis-à-vis aussi de l'environnement. Et à ce niveau, nous voulons vraiment travailler en tant que structure à accompagner les structures gouvernementales à développer des chaînes de valeur alimentaires qui sont efficaces, efficientes, donc qui puissent vraiment nourrir les hommes et aussi être une opportunité de croissance. Parce qu'il faut qu'avant tout, ça soit une opportunité de croissance pour les petits producteurs vraiment qui aujourd'hui, il faut le dire, ont un bénéfice vraiment très minime par rapport à vraiment ce qui est engrangé du point de vue mondial vraiment. Donc vous savez peut-être que ce que nos producteurs touchent dans nos pays ne dépasse certainement pas peut-être entre les 1 et 3% de ce qui est vraiment fait vraiment comme masse monétaire au niveau de ces secteurs. L'autre aspect vraiment, c'est de contribuer vraiment à l'élimination de la déforestation et aussi vraiment de s'assurer que l'approvisionnement de tout ce qui tourne autour du cacao vraiment se fait de manière compatible avec l'environnement. Donc il y a aussi des aspects de restauration des terres. Non seulement nous savons que de plus en plus de terres agricoles pour la cacaoculture manquent et les espaces forestiers sont de plus en plus menacés. Donc qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire pour intensifier la production de du cacao au niveau des exploitations agricoles existantes, de telle sorte que nous puissions réduire les effets qui vont arriver au niveau des massifs forestiers qui subsistent pour le moment. L'autre aspect vraiment dans toutes nos interventions, c'est comment nous assurer vraiment de cet aspect de responsabilité sociale. Donc notamment, vous savez tous que on taxe souvent les secteurs vraiment du problème du travail des enfants, donc de non-respect d'un certain nombre de normes. Donc comment nous pouvons accompagner les différents acteurs pour que du point de vue régulation, tout se fasse vraiment comme il se doit. Donc nous pouvons passer au niveau de la diapositive suivante. Donc ce sont des projets, les deux projets sont vraiment à leur début. Donc le projet Promire a démarré il y a de cela quelques mois. Et le projet Skolou, donc le second que j'ai présenté, a été signé par la partie gouvernementale donc, au cours de cette COP-là. Et on n'a pas de solutions concrètes comme ça sur le terrain pour présenter, mais il y a quand même que lors de l'élaboration de ces deux documents de projet, il y a un certain nombre de leçons vraiment que nous avons essayé de capitaliser pour voir comment vraiment on peut accompagner, comment on peut booster vraiment la production du cacao, en même temps assurer la durabilité environnementale. Donc, si vous prenez le diagramme, il est en anglais, mais il est assez simple. Donc, il y a deux aspects clés sur lesquels il nous faudra vraiment nous assurer vraiment d'avoir des interventions. D'abord, il faut des mécanismes de motivation qui puissent être à la fois directs et des mécanismes de motivation indirects pour les producteurs. Donc, si je prends les mécanismes de motivation indirecte, donc, il y a quand même beaucoup d'aspects sur lesquels nous pouvons travailler pour nous assurer vraiment que la cacaoculture puisse se faire de manière saine. Donc, il y a quand même qu'aujourd'hui, il y a des structures qui proposent, le FIRCA a essayé de présenter ici, donc qui proposent des accès à des financements. Donc, comment nous pouvons vraiment travailler davantage à accroître l'accès des producteurs à ces financements pour les permettre vraiment d'acquérir le nécessaire pour leur production. Il y a aussi des subventions de l'État qui se fait déjà très bien à quelque part. Donc, comment nous pouvons accroître cet aspect-là? Il y a vraiment des choses, si nous arrivons vraiment à vraiment mieux cadrer ces aspects, ça peut contribuer. Donc, il y a aussi le fait que nous pouvons avoir aussi des contributions un peu beaucoup plus de systèmes de motivation, beaucoup plus en nature, donc l'approvisionnement en intrants, donc les différents intrants agricoles, l'approvisionnement, certains de mes prédécesseurs ont mentionné, donc au niveau de la plantation, comment nous pouvons nous assurer que les différents producteurs de cacao donc, puissent être approvisionnés vraiment en différents plans nécessaires, donc qui puissent permettre aussi d'accroître l'agroforesterie. Il y a qu'on peut combiner ces deux différents mécanismes-là. Et au niveau des mécanismes indirects, il y a, si l'aspect social sur lequel nous devons travailler, il y a aussi le fait que les services, et au niveau des services, je me permets quand même de m'attarder là-bas parce que ce qu'on remarque au niveau de la cacaoculture, c'est qu'on produit pour l'extérieur. Nous devons de plus en plus...
We have to produce as if we have to encourage people to consume what we produce. But I think at the level of cocoa, we can do better. If I take the case, for example, we can work to such extent that in our behavior, we should not consider as a food for exportation. We are seeing some improvement, but we need to include in our way of living in the different schools with the cocoa powder, which is not valued at international stage. We can include them in our food customs, and we know that it will not it will be a way for us to encourage a local economy and encourage the production at the local level. So if we keep considering the fact that the cocoa must go abroad and manufactured and come back in the country, this won't be useful for the producers or the farmers. So we have to work on communication in order to support the sector. So we can move to the other slide. Agroforestry was already mentioned here. In the two projects, we are going to focus on the agroforestry models which are applied worldwide, and we are working with the state organs and this institutional research institute. My mentor Christophe said that some options can be applied, and every option must be applied in a specific context. We cannot apply we cannot have a system that can work for everything, for every context. So we have to keep researching in order to do the right thing. I think I can stop at this slide because I've reached the time for the presentation. Once again, thank you to ECRAF and all the other partners who invited FAO to this panel, and thank the government institution that trusted FAO in order to support them in the elaboration of the two projects. We're also working in another dynamic to work and develop another project in very soon that will also contribute to the heritage of Abidjan, as it was mentioned during this COP15. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sawadogo. What I take away is that FAO, upon request of the Ivorian government, is supporting the country in a number of initiatives. They are therefore contributing to the efforts that Côte d'Ivoire undertakes to mitigate the impact of climate change and deforestation. He provided us a number of examples, and he also insisted on the notions of sustainability as well as environmental and social responsibility that we should start to expect, or rather to request from the actors in the field of agriculture. FAO is ready to support initiatives of that kind. Initiatives in the fight against deforestation and for land restoration. I'll not come back to the examples that he gave. We will thank him and now give the floor to Mr. Yves Koulou from from MAS, Côte d'Ivoire. He is in charge of institutional affairs and public relations. His experience of 30 years is in rural development. He benefited from a number of projects financed by the World Bank, the World Food Program. They worked with the FAO before he joined MAS. He was working at ANADE, a technical manager at ITA. He also worked at the World Foundation for Cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire, technical secretary at the Public-Private Partnership Platform at the board of Coffee Cocoa. He also worked at CARE International. As you see, He has a lot of experience. He worked in the design and implementation as well as dissemination of agricultural practices, including fertilization of the soil with various practices. Mr. Jean-Yves Koulou took part in a number of strategic reflection and discussions on the field of coffee and cocoa with private and public actors. As an example, the dialogue with the European Union on a sustainable initiative. He is an agronomist. For those who have gone through ENSA, he's in the 22nd promotion. So we'll talk to us about cocoa for generation. Thank you very much, facilitator. I believe that our capacity to adapt to high heat is not that strong, so we will try to go fast. So Mars is a chocolate company, the biggest in the world, I would say. So I will tell you about the strategy that we call Cocoa for Generation. That strategy comes from the global strategy from Mars, Sustainable Generation Plan. That strategy takes into account all ingredients. True, we are a chocolate company, but we also work in the field of sugar and palm trees. So the strategy that focuses on cocoa was launched in 2018. It's called Cocoa for Generation. So to come back to the global strategy, the purpose is to act for a healthier planet, to promote health, well-being, as well as prosperity for the communities. So on the actions for a healthy planet, it has 3 subcomponents. Action for the climate. We want to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases in our value chain by 27% in 2025 and 67% by 2050. The second subcomponent has to do with water management. We want to reduce by half the consumption of non-sustainable water by 2025. We want also to take out the use of water when it's not sustainable in our value chain. And we also want to efficiently use the land areas that is used in our value chain. So those are the subcomponents of the Cocoa for Generation initiative that was launched in 2018 for more than $1 billion investment for the period 2018-2028. It is based on 2 main pillars. Next slide, please. Or the previous slide. Previous slide. Yes, this one. So there are 2 main pillars. Today, sustainable or responsible cocoa today and sustainable cocoa tomorrow. Responsible cocoa, we want to make sure that 100% of our cocoa can be traced around the world by 2025, and we'll also want to place community and the environment at the center of our efforts. More specifically, since this is what is bringing us here today, we are going to talk about forest preservation. We are committing to create a more modern value chain for cocoa and includes a value chain that is inclusive and sustainable for future generations. So we want to be able to trace the cocoa that we buy from our suppliers by 2025, to trace them by 100%. We have an action plan for cocoa and forest. We are fully taking part in the initiative, the Cocoa Forest Initiative, and our action has to do with restoration of forest, sustainable production, and the preservation of the source of income of the farmers. Since 2019, we are publicly disclosing the quantity of cocoa that we purchase that can be traced to the producers, even up to the individual farms. We were able to give an interactive map that allows to identify the areas where we get our cocoa supplies from. As you clearly see on the table on the screen, at Mars, we don't directly work on the field, but our intervention is done via our partners and suppliers. I'm not going to list them because I don't want to forget any. So, thanks to our program, since 2018, we've distributed 1,386,000 trees. And the target for the year 2022 is 1,500,000 and more. Thanks to our partners and our cocoa suppliers, more than 593,000 cocoa producers were trained in the protection of forests. Since 2018, we worked on 59,543 hectares, and our target was 31,892. Now, on sustainable production, in 2021, we trained 47 producers to good agricultural practices. This year, the target is 60,863. In the last years, our programs have given support to women, their families, and cocoa-producing communities. We gave support to associations to credit and saving and associations, microcredit association. We also have the entity care. So we multiplied by 3 the number of AVEX, so these associations for credit and savings. So that gave access to a number of credit and savings products. And we also had financial education. Now, on the involvement of community and incentive for social inclusions, focusing on women and youth, we conducted a study with a partner, which is called KIT International. The main result was that it's important to take into account the needs of women in the fight against deforestation. It is the reason why in our program with CARE International, we took them into account so that they become so that they are empowered. So we worked with adult and young women. More than 10,000 action plans have been drafted and should be implemented in the coming years. What are the next steps? We will strengthen our commitment to reach our goals through our commitment with the initiative Cocoa Forest. We'll also increase research in innovative agriculture. We know that science can help us produce or be more productive in a more healthy environment. And currently, in collaboration with a Swiss company, we are developing a new technology, a kit of early detection. I believe my colleagues talked about the swollen shoot disease, the main difficulty in cocoa farming. We are currently finalizing an early detection kit to detect the virus of swollen shoot disease in cocoa trees that do not show any symptom within 60 minutes. With our partner CIFOR, we're also working towards that. And we worked on the gender field, and our target is to empower women in our supply chain and in the communities where we get the cocoa from. So that's a holistic approach that is related to the Abidjan Legacy Program. Our approach is really to implement our strategy in compliance with the national strategy. Last slide. Since, just as we say at Mars, better moments make the world smile. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Koulou. Alors, donc avec...
Thank you, Mr. Klou. With that presentation, in addition to the farmers' associations, the political authorities, the technical partners, the local partners, as well as the one from abroad, all of the stakeholders in the field and the industry clearly shows us that they are committed to a sustainable cocoa production. The example of Mars that was just presented to us speaks for itself. More than $1 billion invested. That means that they're taking it seriously. So Mars is making a lot of interventions. The figures are there. They provided us with statistics. And what I can take away is that in the future, it's to strengthen the initiative that has started, the initiative Cocoa Forest, and also their presence within the community. We know that the challenges evolve with time, and research needs to adapt to the evolution. They also talked about research in favor of the cocoa farming, which has to do with swollen shoot. And they also mentioned social inclusion. I believe that all of this is positive. We would like to congratulate Mars for that. To conclude, I will quickly present to you a number of actions undertaken by the National Center on this item, since he has become a panelist who's going to make the last presentation. I am taking the floor. I would like to present our facilitator. He did not introduce himself when he started, Professor Sangare Aboudraman, the standing managing director of CNRA. He agreed to come to facilitate for this workshop, and he also, beyond the moderation, he wanted to share in a nutshell what CNRA has drawn as lessons and share with us. Professor Sangaré has worked at the University of Abidjan before he went to CNRA. There he worked with CORAF before he came back to the CNRA where he works. I have to say that after his presentation, we will allow 3 main actors to speak. One farmer, one from Sodefort, and another one from Anader, 2 minutes each before we open the discussions. Those last 3 will speak from their seats. Professor Sangaré, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwame. My goal here is not to go into too much detail of what we do as a research. What I want to do is to present to you key activities we undertook on today's topic, restoration of degraded soils in the field of cocoa farming in Côte d'Ivoire. I cannot give you the number of projects that we are conducted. We have many. But what I can say is that at CNRA, we work on a number of initiatives of restoration of degraded soils. We have a holistic approach. We do not take things from one end. I'll give you an example. We have projects funded by IDH and the Cocoa Coffee Board. We undertook a number of activities on soil fertilization, taking into account preliminary studies that had been undertaken on those soils. We also conducted research activities on the mineral composition of the soils, for example, the phosphate that we studied via a project funded by OCP. We had another project that allowed us to work on the calcium and magnesium in the soils. Slide. We also worked on the use of organic and mineral fertilizers via the Cocoa Soil Project. We worked on introducing trees in the cocoa production system. And all of that also depends on the origin of the trees. We use fruit trees, we used essence, or trees of essence in the context of a 2QC project, which is an ongoing project. We also work on adding other trees in the context of the 2QC project. We have activities in association with subsistence crops, and they benefit of fertilization that could also benefit the cocoa trees. Next slide, please. I believe that you are too much ahead. On the second topic, mapping, there is a major initiative that we've undertaken on mapping the soil where cocoa is being farmed. That has been mentioned earlier. Soils are degraded, but we do not know how degraded they are. What we noticed is that even the proposals that were made and that we usually make, they're outdated because we do not take into account what is really lacking in the soil. So the study we conducted in the context of the 2QC product, or the IDH product, it allowed us to produce a number of statistics that I am showing here on the screen. On the macro element, we know today that more than 82% of the soils that are used for cocoa farming have a lack of N.
Magnésium. Donc c'est pour vous dire.
They lack nitrogen, they lack calcium. So the degradation we generally speak about, we can identify the macro elements that are lacking. Most importantly, I believe, and that came out of the studies, is the fact that today, out of 25% of the areas where cocoa is being cultivated, the pH is acid, 5.5. And you will agree with me that this is not in favor of cocoa farming. So we got various results from the studies. And to summarize, the needs for nutrients for the soils, since we have made some recommendations in 1970, those needs have significantly evolved, so we will have to revise the recommendations we make to the farmers. What we note is the lack of nitrogen and inorganic elements, and this is where we should work on for the restoration of the soils. We also notice that there's an increasing need in calcium, potassium, and magnesium. But for phosphate, it's not the need is not as high. So we now have a better mapping of the soil where cocoa is being farmed, and we'll be able to make new recommendations to fertilize the soils, but also it's a basis to initiate restoration of the degraded soils. So this is what I wanted to share with you briefly, to say that in that landscape, we are also playing a significant role. Thank you.
Donc avec
you gotten back the microphone. So on this note, we are done with the technical presentations. We'll now move to the third phase we announced, and it has to do with the discussions. For that phase, I will give the microphone to Dr. Christophe so he can facilitate the discussion and give the floor to the entities he mentioned. I believe there is a representative of a cooperative who wanted to share her experience with us. What's her name, please? Mrs. Bamba, I believe. Is she in the room? Please.
If you can take the floor to share with us your experience. Good afternoon, Mr. Iba. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mrs. Bamba. I'm the Director General of the company, the Executive Director of Société Igak, located in the Amé region. We gather. I am Mrs. Bamba Awa, Executive Director of the company agricultural cooperative in Yakasia Trobu, located in Azope. We gather 3,300 on a huge superficie. What we know today has climate change effects. It was proven that for us, it was important for us as cooperative to take the responsibility in order to combat efficiently as the desert expansion or the land degradation, in order for us to have also a sustainable agriculture, especially in cocoa and coffee. As you know, in our constitution, we have to take the opinion of everybody before implementing a project in order to reach success. So before putting agroforestry in place in the different communities, we ask for the farmers' opinion. And in the discussion, it wasn't new, because for them, agroforestry was part of the way of working. It was done way before. And others found that they didn't see the interest of planting trees. They were concerned regarding the secularization of their lands. So we understood that in order to achieve success in this project, we needed to sensitize, to make them understand the importance of reforestation, and we had to work as well in collaboration with the direction of Ministry and Forest in the region, so that we are able to talk with the farmers, convince them, and encourage them to apply the measures, so that, and also guarantee the fact that they shouldn't worry about the security of the land. So after the implementation, we led some training with some module of training. We have a proximity radio, and we train the farmers on good agricultural practice, the importance of planting trees, so that not only the farmers understand the importance of planting, but the whole community as well understand the benefit of it. We had to touch all the different stakeholders in order to have a good adherence to the project. We also found that it was also important to put women in the heart of the action, because women is source of life. Women are source of life. When we take care of the environment, we have life. So we needed to associate women to reforestation projects. So we entrusted the planting to women. So we trained them for the production of tree seeding. So with the support of the different partners, we share them freely to the different farmers. So we have been implementing the project of agroforestry for 3 years now. We were able to touch 600 produce farmers in 600 acres. So we understood what you've been doing. So we should encourage this type of initiative. The microphone is closed. So these are the kind of initiative that we should replicate. What I draw as a positive aspect on what is being presented is that she starts from a diagnostic, because we noticed that indeed when they led the diagnostic analysis, the concerns of the first people concerned were far from what the national plans or scientific institutions were proposing. It is important to have a good sensitization and some training action, and to put women at the heart of the action. We are now going to ask two major actors at the national level. They are involved in this kind of issues. We're going to ask Anader, if Anader is present in the room. Mr. Vincent Eouman. I am Vincent Eouman, the national coordinator of the cocoa coffee sector. Please stand up so that we can see you. I can sit now? Please carry on. So, I work at Anader. In addition to what was said previously regarding agroforestry, the lesson learned are as follows. I think one of the speakers in the group of the panelists, he highlights one concern that for me should be the start of everything. This is the institutional framework. The institutional framework for me is of utmost importance. We should put it forward before starting any action on the ground. What do we notice on the ground? We support the Cocoa Coffee Board in the implementation of its program of reforestation. But on the ground, we notice that during the distribution of the different tree seeding, the same producer or farmer receive many projects, benefits from many projects. He benefits from the projects funded by the board or maybe Ajib or any other structure. And when the producer or the farmer benefits from all these these seedings, you don't know what to do with it. So an institutional framework has to be clearly defined in order to better coordinate the action of all the stakeholders. And this will allow us to optimize the financial means in order to achieve the result expected. The second item is what the previous speaker mentioned, the sensitization of the communities. It is one of the lessons that we learned during the implementation, especially during the GRID program in 2021, where we planted around 3,500,000 seed with the cocoa and coffee board. When the farmer is sensitized and he understood the benefits of what he's supposed to do, I think the producer, I can say the producer during the dry season himself takes water to pour on the plants, on the seed, in order to help them support this dry season. But when the producer or the farmer didn't understand the basis of the action, you can plant the trees, but they are going to die at the end of the day. The second thing I would like to mention is the soil restoration. I think the different panelists touched on it. For me, it wasn't enough developed because we often talk about the reforestation aspect of the trees, but apart from the trees, we have this the rotation system in a diversification of the trees, which contributes to the restoration of the trees, of the soil, sorry. With the subsistence agriculture, we put in place some model of diversification with the implementation plan in order to convince the farmers to get involved in this action. When we put in place such system, we not only conserve the structure and the texture of the soil, because we have carried out a project with Cargill, and we noticed that sometimes we advise the farmer to use fertilizers. We tell them, we keep repeating that they should buy fertilizers, but after the study, we noticed that first of all we should make some amendment in order before putting the different fertilizers. There's also the soil restoration for short term on which we should insist. I think in Abengoro we put some improved some fallow land in order to improve this technology and improve them in the rural aspect sector.
Merci bien, je pense que
Thanks a lot. I think it's quite clear. I would like to hear a key actor, which is SODEFOR. If Colonel Léon Sagwe, I'm Colonel Léon Sagwe. I'm the technical director of SODEFOR. This is the company, the company for the development of forests in Côte d'Ivoire. It was created in 1966. From the onset, the purpose was to build, to create a forestry plantation. But since 1996, it was expanded to the classified forest, which covered 4 million acres of forest. So before 2002, the rate of degradation was inferior to 25%, but followed by the different crises that we have seen, we have a degradation rate of more than 50%. So many strategies have been put in place, and the last one is regarding the preservation and extinction of the forest, which is drawn up from the the forest policy adopted in 2018. So right now, SODEFOR has achieved 220 hectares of reforestation and 60,000 of agroforestry reforestation. The lesson learned can be of different nature. First of all, the agroforestry has been a key component of SODE4. So today there is an opportunity for us to increase the production of wood and the stock of CO2, and also restore the biodiversity, because restoration go through reforestation or by a natural regeneration. Today we have many forests where we see the coming back of. We can improve also the profitability of agricultural crops. It is good to improve research and development. We have some lands we date back for 30 years with a density of trees from 400 to 60 stick. The minimum is of 500 kilos. So we have to take stock and find an optimum density and the wood species that we are supposed to use. If we want to have the different benefits in terms of improvement of productivity, we shouldn't play on the long run. It is on the short or medium term. There is a work to be done. So in order to be able to restore the degraded forest, we have projects that are still being negotiated, where we expect to realize more than 300,000 of agroforestry restoration. So it requires a technicity. We have to develop the forest based on the community. So on small superficie, to monitor small areas of reforestation is not the same compared to big areas. So we have also to put in place a mechanism of sharing of benefits. It is good to put the mechanism of reforestation, but we have to reassure the farmers on the fact that he is going to draw benefit from the reforestation plan on the long run. Hence the implementation of a follow-up mechanism of reforestation. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'm glad to see that there's a general and overall dynamic, and the different stakeholders are really involved. We are now going to go back to the public, to the audience. We have spoken a lot. The audience may have some questions, or maybe contribution, or maybe some point of clarification, to ask question, or maybe provide some comments or proposals. So we will give you the microphone, so if you have something to say, so it can be a request for clarification, or maybe a comment or a proposal. I would like to take the floor 1 minute. Dear facilitator, I have something to say. I would say that we're going to take 30 minutes for the discussion. We have talked with the organizers. They say that the room will be available for the next 30 minutes.
Donc voilà, ça veut dire que vraiment
So the comments have to be very brief, so let's not repeat what has already been said. We will make a list, so get ready. I am Mr. Kone Nanga.
Tivoli.
Mr. Tivoli, Olivier. Shérif Mamadou. Luc Yoro. Dear moderator, we have 8 names. So people who are willing to share some contribution. We have a lady behind. No. So there is no woman willing to ask a question. We start by the man. So we have to be very brief and precise. We start with Mr. Miezan, or is it is Madame? Professor, do I have the floor? Thank you, Professor. I would like to thank all the panelists and the different speakers for the different presentations. I have 2 concerns. The first one is about agroforestry. By listening to the different speakers, we notice that all the stakeholders are practicing agroforestry. We know that the different peasants, the different farmers want to have some good yields. All the structures applying agroforestry have adopted the preconized densities advised by research, or every structure is defining its own density to be implemented by the farmers. What could be the yields from the farmers and their reaction to this productivity? The second concern is for Professor Sangari. It's just a small question. It won't take long. Professor, in the presentation you indicated that a study was carried out regarding the soil, regarding the production of cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire. I would like to know the lack of this, the insufficiency that were raised in the course of the study. Are they same in the same grid zone of production in the east and west? Thank you. Mr. Kone, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the panelists for these presentations. I have 2 quick questions. I come back on what Mr. Christophe Kwame said. It is good to plant, but we have to make sure that the trees are growing efficiently. We have many initiatives on the ground. The cocoa and coffee board, for example. We have 5 million tree seeding that were distributed for 240,000 acres planted. So my question is as follows: what are the different approaches that are used by the different structures working on the agroforestry to make sure that this tree seeding are planted and that they are growing efficiently to become trees and not renew the planting every year? This take me to the question that I'm going to, the question of Mr. Sawadogo of FAO. He said that FAO is working under the request on the different states. My question is as follows: do we have a feedback mechanism based on the different experiments or lesson learned on the basis of the elaboration of the projects to allow the governments to adapt their regulation and create this conducive environment for the achievement of the different initiatives and also the extension? Mr. Jacone, thank you. I would like to commend all the panelists for their significant response to the challenge of land degradation on the basis of agricultural production. What I've been able to draw as conclusion on the basis of the different presentation from ECRAF and FIRCA, I was able to note the synergy that was good to implement between among the different sectors. there is a contribution that I would like to make. For me, we should go beyond the synergy among the sectors. We have to take into account the different articulation between the sectors and the territories, so that when we have non-accredited actors of the sectors could contribute to the land degradation. I'm referring to the financial actors which are on some territories. The main activity or the core activity is not the intervention at the level of the sectors, but the fact that the strategy includes the territory, so these actors can have a contribution in the strategy of combating deforestation. This is what I wanted to share as a contribution. Thank you.
Bonjour à tout le monde, merci beaucoup.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Schnitt. I'm in charge of green innovation. Thank you for all the presentation. I think it was a good overview. For me, it is not clear. It is good to do something to improve the soil, the quality of the soil, but based on our experience, we know that it is not enough. Then an average of the crops is around 3.5 acres. And we have seen that it is not enough. The living income is not enough. We want to know what are the strategies in the context of the agricultural sector in Côte d'Ivoire. There is a structural change. What are the ideas and strategies in order to reach a situation where all the family working in the farming sectors are able to get a living income that is decent? Thank you. Mr. Tivoli. Morning, I'm Olivier Tivoli from GIZ. I'm from San Pedro. I would like to commend all the panelists and come back on two small items. We are working on the ground, and the sensitization has been at the core of everything we have said. We have to sensitize the population on agroforestry, but there is an issue that we're facing, is that the population are afraid of planting trees because they think that by planting trees, some loggers will come and take the trees and destroy a big chunk of the production of cocoa. I think Côte d'Ivoire has developed a forest code from 2019. I would like to ask Mr. Yapo, what about the decree of application of the forest code that would allow us to deepen or reassure the farmers regarding the protection of the plantation, of the crops, the quality of the trees, the quality of the site of production? So all these actors are linked to the decree of application. The second item is about what Mr. Kwame said. Some tree seeding actors live from this activity. So the purpose of putting in place this tree seeding is for them to generate revenue. But what we see on the ground is that some industrial actors create some big tree seeding infrastructure to such extent that the small actor who was trying to increase his revenue is no longer able to find the necessary market that he was gaining before. What can we do? We talked about the institutional framework. Is there the possibility to regulate this aspect? Thank you. Mr. Koulibaly Losini, next speaker. Thank you very much. I am Mr. Losini Koulibaly. I'm the coordinator of Program Environment at Kura International. Based on the previous intervention of Mr. Tivoli, I think he gathered all the interrogation that I had. I would like to commend him for this intervention, because nowadays in the rural community, the sensitization message that we send to the community is to protect the environment, but it is also to know that the tree that is planted is going to generate revenue. That's the question. Is the tree going to have a cost? The management of this problematic takes into account the land property aspect as a whole, and it is important, I think, that the actors have to keep a close eye on this issue at the level of the state and all the stakeholders. So these are the two questions that I wanted to raise, and commend Mr. Tivoli, which hit the nail on the head.
Sheriff Mamadou.
Merci.
I am Mr. Sherif Mamadou, professor at the University Félix Houphouët-Boigny, researcher. In the presentation of Mr. Sangari, it was demonstrated that the soil of cacao culture have really degraded, and he presented some shortfalls at the level of the macro elements. The most important one is the nitrogen. We know that the contribution of nitrogen in the mineral fertilization can be a source of CO2 emission, of greenhouse gas emission. How the CNRE is enclosing the production of nitrogen in the cocoa production, and without having a negative impact by the production of greenhouse gas. My second concern is the place of fundamental research in the agroforestry sector. Have seen many works or interventions in the research and development. When we know that research and development is drawn up on the basis of fundamental research, as a researcher, I'm wondering what is the place of the fundamental research in all these mechanisms? Thank you. Thanks a lot. Mr. Likiavu. Thank you, dear panelists. I'm Luc Yoro. I hope you can hear me clearly. So thank you very much for the different interventions on the different subjects. I noticed that among the means of restoration of the Ivorian soil, agroforestry was one of the key elements. My question is as follows. Do you think that the labelization of an equitable commerce can be a determining element as an incentive measure to help the farmers or cooperatives, to encourage them to adopt agroforestry in the way of working? This is the question. Equitable business as an incentive for the adoption of agroforestry. Fair trade as an incentive for agroforestry. Thank you, Mr. Yoro. We will now give the floor to the different panelists to provide answers to the question raised. It is not easy. There are comments, but there are also many questions. The first question from Mr. Miezan. We suggest that we suggest the implementation of a systematic agroforestry. The question is to know whether we have carried out many studies in order to encourage a certain density of plantation, the technical aspects, the appropriate technical aspects are put in place in order to implement correctly agroforestry. I think some questions are intertwined. It is because we want to guarantee the revenue of the farmer on the space, on the area of plantation. I take the floor to answer. 4 years ago, we organized a workshop on available agroforestry techniques, and during this workshop, this seminary, I was the president of the scientific commission. One of the recommendations that we made during this workshop was that nowadays the recommended density are based on the type of wood species to be planted. We cannot say today there is the standard density. But during this workshop, we received some indications on the rate of shadow that we have to respect or comply when we want to associate trees to cocoa farming. Nowadays, we consider that agroforestry is planting trees in association with cocoa farming. This is why we might not achieve the purpose of the project. We have to draw a broader picture. Those who don't want to associate plants in the crops, in the plantation.
We've seen instances where trees have been planted around the farm. The issue of density is therefore solved. We said when we spoke that we need a holistic approach, and I'll take that opportunity to answer the question on GIZ. In my opinion, to reach our goals, we need to take into account what I always call the family unit of exploration. On one operation, there are various actors, each of them with their own interests. If you do not take a holistic approach for the culture, some people will feel left on the side. We understood that the strategy established by the Board of Cocoa Coffee allowed the whole unit of production to benefit from it. For example, women were more oriented toward subsistence farming, and that allowed them to take good care of the farm the first 3 years. That was demonstrated. The benefits were also clearly shown. We had an economic study that showed that. Then we were told if you do not clearly explain the use of the tree by the producer, he might plant it and might not guarantee or do any maintenance. But if all of that explanation is provided, I can be sure that the tree that is planted is taken care of. This is what I wanted to say. Dr. Kwame? Maybe he will complement what you said. I am not an expert in the field, but I fully agree with what Mr. Kwame from FICA just said. But I still want to add something. Because early on, our expert from SODEFOR was saying that with density of 500 or 600 trees per hectare, we can have a good yield against 500 kilograms in the rural area. It is true, but I believe that this is calling for research. Why am I saying that? Rainforest in this room, I remember that in 2005-2006, when the certification arrived in Côte d'Ivoire, we were to define the density of trees per hectare. After consultation with CNRA, we were at 20 to 25 hectares with a shade rate of 40%. So research, not only CNRA, but the field of research should take hold of that issue, examine the various yields and densities that are applied and come with recommendation, because the density that is recommended by SODEFOR is good in classified forests. There's a difference that needs to be made between the density of trees in a classified forest and the density in a rural area. What is true, there are two models. It's about planting trees in cocoa farms. So we need to identify the density that allows not only to preserve the environment, but that allows the producer to have significant yield. Since I have the microphone, I would like to talk about the tree ownership. We need to note that the forest code that was adopted recently by the government, out of the 35 texts that were drafted, 34 of them were drafted in a participatory manner, and one has to do with the ownership of the tree. So the producer or the farmer that plants the tree is the owner of the tree. But we still need to draw a link with the code of forest and the land property code. So there needs to be a consultation between the Ministry of Water and Forestry to define the practical modalities that will avoid any confusion. That consultation will be essential. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Kwame, Christophe wanted to add something on the issue of density. I just wanted to provide complementary information. I think that there is a wide of various knowledge. What's the board of cocoa, coffee board? What's the conclusion or the recommendation that was to have 40% shade, not more, or else it would have an impact on the yield. You can already set the density from the start, but there's no one-size-fits-all model. We definitely need to take into account the context in the area of interest. Now, on the question that to do with the studies on the soil conducted by the CNRA, we provided the percentage. So that shows that it's not homogeneous everywhere. So depending on the plot, the situation will differ. For example, what we said is that on 84% of those plots, we noticed that there's a lack of nitrogen. So that shows that that phenomenon is wider spread than the others. We'll now move to the question by Mr. Kone. Mr. Shomamadou also asked a question. You see that there are various approaches. We do not have to directly bring the fertilizer. We suggested cocoa farming with other crops. That is a biological solution to for the correction of the lack of nitrogen. So there are various solutions that we could use without having to use the usual fertilizers. This is what I wanted to say to that question. Can we now move to the question of Mr. Kone? It's still a question on the CNRA. The level of fertility of the soil, does it depend on the region or is it the same everywhere? We need to make a difference between the study that was conducted on the land where cocoa is farmed and the study on the land in the areas where cocoa is farmed. So the first study had to do with the whole forest area, the level of fertility of the soils in those areas. This was financed by the Cocoa Coffee Board. Now we will know, depending on the zones or depending on the area, what is the level of fertility. That will allow the people who do cocoa farming to take a decision before they go ahead. Then what the other professor mentioned was a study that was done on cocoa farms, where we need to identify the elements that you need to add. The elements depend or vary depending on some conditions, whether it be a young farm or an older cocoa farm. We'll now move to the question of Mr. Kone. I did not clearly understand.
Je n'ai pas compris. Non, Monsieur Kone, vous pouvez reprendre la question.
Very quickly, the first question is that I wanted to know if there are mechanisms that are in place to make sure that the plants that are planted become indeed trees, and that we're not going to renew it every year because the farmers will not take care of it. Now, second question, based on that experience, since FAO works upon request of the government or the states, I want to know if the lessons learned are brought back to the government so that they adapt the recommendations to create that favorable environment, because it does not seem to be the case. So that's a question to the FAO. Thank you very much. To answer the first question on survival of what has been planted, what I can say is that in our systems we need to have monitoring mechanisms. It's not just about going there and planting the tree, just like Christophe said. We need to move to a different paradigm and raise trees the way we raise children, because that requires some care. It needs to be monitored, and we need to make sure that what we planted survives, and we need to make sure that it grows properly and bring all that is necessary for that plant to grow. There is, of course, a monitoring evaluation system that will need to be put in place. Some tools are available today. We could use drones or such means to follow. Christophe said that for cocoa farming, what is asked is a certain rate of shade. If we want that kind or that rate of shade, we need to use some tools to make sure that what we are doing on the field is matches or is indeed the reality. Now, about FAO, projects that are being done for the Green Fund or the Green Climate Fund, there are some bodies that have the capacity to manage the funds. We can ask the state or the government first to adapt the regulation so that they have the favorable environment for the initiative to succeed. Is it what you asked? No, I said based on your experience, do you give feedback to the government so that the state or the government adapt those feedback to create that favorable environment? The question that is asked to FAO is not only a question that needs to be asked to FAO, a question that is relevant to all of those who carry out some projects. This is to give an answer to your question. You need to have a framework for consultation and for capitalization. And such a framework will allow partners like FAO to come, give feedback on the lessons learned in implementing the project. That's a major conclusion of our consultation. I am of the same opinion. Now, the third question from Mr. Konen. May I please add something? Sorry, please go ahead. I wanted to talk about the approach to see if the plants survive after they're planted or the trees survive. I believe that today everyone is aware that we need to monitor and to know the rate of survival of the trees. We have partners that have various approaches. They work with drones or they use the mortality rate. It would be good to have an exchange or discussion of those experiences. I made that suggestion in the context of the initiative, the European initiative, Sustainable Cocoa. There was a forum on agroforestry where I suggested that as a topic, but I believe that here too it would be of interest. In the future, in my opinion, it would be good if we were able to monitor by satellite, because every year follow each plant with the drone and have the mortality rate, it would be too expensive. So we collaborate with an entity that works on an algorithm to follow by satellite the agroforestry. And we worked with a number of developers who said that one of the major challenges is to provide baseline data. So we decided to invest in a number of baseline data, and right now we are going to do a hackathon for the startups and the researchers in Côte d'Ivoire so that they see what they can do with the set of baseline data we've gathered. Thank you, madam. We're going to move to the question of Mr. Kodne. It is more a comment than a question. The suggestion of Mr. Kone is to go beyond the synergy that we talked about at an institutional level. He suggested that we go to the field with an innovation platform with various actors, even with the donors. Does somebody have a comment to make on that suggestion? I'm not sure I clearly understood the question. I think it comes from IDH. We know each other. He's talking about the approach that Christophe and we talked about. Literally translated the drawer approach that involves all of the stakeholders, including the donors. It is an approach that we are testing in the Cavalier area to have a stronger impact on the actions, with the actions we undertake.
C'est une contribution. Voilà.
The question from Magnus. I believe an answer was provided. Tivoli, same. We answered part of it on awareness raising. Would you like to add a comment? Mr. Tivoli talked about regulating the nurseries and the revenue of the tree that is planted to incentivize the farmers. We come back to the institutional framework. I believe that there is a competition. We need to recognize it. It is important that those who do the nurseries be regulated somewhat. They should be recognized. Somebody give them a mandate to grow or to use the seeds to make the nursery. So those nurseries need to be certified and recognized so that they have the authorization to multiply that and have quality products. We need to know what the source is and when it's available, so that the one who does the nursery has the niche, because the issue of transportation will not be an issue for a major nursery provider. Those who are in the field, I encourage them to turn to quality so that we can really acknowledge the added value that they bring. We also talk about monitoring and evaluation. I think we could do both. Where does the choice come from, the selection of the plant to be to grow? You have male, you have female, you have hermaphrodite. If you want to multiply a variety, you need to make sure that what you have used will produce what you expect. And from there, you need to start with the research institutes to make sure that there is monitoring, and so that everyone benefits from the variety you have multiplied. Another suggestion on monitoring of the planting. The consultation framework should require that, so that each stakeholder that invests a lot to make the material available is also able to give feedback in the field and on what they would have planted. Besides the figures that we provide to say we distributed X number of plants, we should be able to say that the year after, X number of plants are still being produced. We need to give a reference so that any assessor or inspector should be able to go to the field and assess what is being done. This will be a way to give a better value to the actions we are undertaken. Thank you.
Un peu plus direct par rapport à ce que Dr. Kwame Christophe.
I'd like to be more straightforward. It is the Cocoa Coffee Board who's in charge of managing anything that has to do with cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire. There are a number of initiatives of agroforestry in Côte d'Ivoire. Maybe we should recommend to the Cocoa Coffee Board to have a mechanism to help them monitor all the initiatives, the ongoing initiatives, but also to make an evaluation or an assessment of what is being done, because we can say we distributed 50 million trees in 10 years, but we will not know how many trees are indeed on the field. Thank you. Mr. Koulibaly Loseni.
Dans le même... d'accord. Alors, Shérif Mamadou, bon, on a répondu à la première question.
We answered the first question of Mr. Shérif Mamadou. Second question was a fundamental research. So what place would you like to have in looking for solutions to the issues? What we shared was research and development. I believe that a number of entities do fundamental research. There's anything that is done on swollen shoot, it is WAVE that is giving support to the work that is being done. We talked about a tool for detection. I think it was the representative of Mars that talked about it. That detection tool was done in a lab of fundamental research. So depending on the issue, yes, there are actions on fundamental research. But now if there are areas where technical equipment can meet the need, we need to know that those technical equipment exist so that they can play their role instead of us going to Switzerland. If that is available in university, for example, they should let us know. So what is being done on the field, in the field of agroforestry, it is the association of all of those actors. You're not going to do that in the lab. The lab multiplies quickly the essences or the trees that will be selected. So unless there is a specific issue, we should be able to discuss it. Today with the swollen shoot, we talked about the CRISPR method, which is genetic engineering that allows for resistant plants. Are there national entities that can invest in that field or that can do the research in that field? Since we do not have it at the local level, we do it with external actors. So fundamental research is supporting what is being done on the field. This is all I can say. The interpreters will have to stop in 5 minutes since time is up. The funds that we receive is for applied research, but it happens that for applied research, we are faced with limitations. In such an instance, discussions with the fields or sectors of agriculture, we discussed about the options. And we can have investment to strengthen the technical possibilities of the CNRA. And some partners accept to conduct the fundamental research that is necessary to support applied research. But based on the mandate that was given to us or to them, fundamental research is not involved in the resources that are mobilized. But when they come up to us and we discuss with the sector, there is still the possibility to fund that research. But the one who spoke is right. Indeed, we need to find resources to finance or to fund fundamental research.
Commencer par le cadre politique. Le ministère de l'Enseignement supérieur et de la Recherche scientifique, dont relève la recherche fondamentale, en ce qui concerne le cacaoyer, a mis en place un programme. C'est le seul programme agricole pour le moment à caractère national que le ministère porte. Et ce programme porte sur le swollen shoot du cacaoyer. Et dans ce programme, au jour d'aujourd'hui, c'est le CNRA qui a le lead, c'est-à-dire la lourde tâche de coordonner les activités, mais il est entendu que dans la mise en œuvre, tous les chercheurs.
So the researchers that come from the various university research institutions or any research institution, they should be involved. And that program, it is planned, or fundamental research is expected. Without waiting for that program to be implemented, CNRA is already conducted fundamental research. Dr. Kwame already mentioned it. We screened all the varieties, or rather the clones, clones available, and we had a clear mapping of what is more successful for in vitro culture. We work on some of them to improve. So there's an item of fundamental research for in vitro culture that CNRA is conducted. Besides that, there's also mapping of the viral stems of the swollen shoot that we have in Côte d'Ivoire. Because that disease, there was an outbreak of that disease, but we did not know how severe.
Aujourd'hui, et on sait actuellement qu'il y a 3 souches qui circulent, dont une qui est très virulente. Et
The interpreters interrupt their work, and thank you very much for your attention.
C'est juste pour vous donner quelques exemples pour dire que la recherche fondamentale a toute sa place. Et la question qui est effectivement posée et qui est un peu embêtante, c'est qui finance cette recherche-là. En principe, une institution comme le CNRA existe pour cela. Au moment où je vous parle, nous sommes en négociation pour que le ministère porte des projets de recherche au niveau du gouvernement pour financement. Arrête.
L'université.
Non, c'est pas. D'accord, donc c'était ce qu'il fallait que je réagisse, parce que ça c'est mon terrain. Alors, donc il y a la question de labellisation. Est-ce que le commerce équitable, en tant que mesure incitative, est envisageable? Ça, je vous laisse...
Bon, moi, en tant qu'ancien vulgarisateur, je ne voudrais pas aller dans ce sens. Parce que toute adoption conditionnée par quelque chose, c'est une adoption qui sera, à mon avis, éphémère. Ça veut dire que si le producteur est en train de planter l'arbre parce qu'on lui a promis quelque chose, le jour où ce qu'on lui a promis n'existe plus, il ne le fera pas. C'est pourquoi il faut raisonner comme ce que Vincent a dit. Vincent a dit, vous faites le diagnostic, vous regardez leurs besoins. Il dit que moi j'ai besoin de cet arbre parce qu'il a compris que cet arbre aura une importance pour moi. À partir de ce moment-là, s'il accepte de prendre l'arbre et d'aller planter, on n'a pas besoin de mesures d'accompagnement. C'est ce qui fait que certains projets, bon, vous faites ça, on vous donne ça en compensation. Vous faites ça, on vous donne en compensation. Le jour où la compensation n'existe pas, ils ne le feront pas. Donc, à mon avis, il faut raisonner comme ce que Vincent a dit. Vincent est Ougman de la NADER. C'est bon?
Oui. Allez-y, Patrice, allez-y. Ah, ok.
Ok, merci bien. Donc, juste un peu rajouter un peu quelque chose sur cette question de commerce équitable. C'est bien vrai, d'une manière ou d'une autre, ça peut motiver les producteurs, mais comme il a dit, ce n'est pas quelque chose qui est pérenne. Donc, ça peut être quelque chose promis aujourd'hui, quelque chose qui est assez motivant pour les producteurs sur le marché international aujourd'hui, mais ce n'est pas évident que ça puisse se maintenir à long terme. Donc, il faut que nous puissions vraiment revenir vraiment les pieds sur terre, c'est dire avant tout que ce que nous sommes en train de disséminer sur le terrain comme technologie, comme produit, qui puisse inciter vraiment les producteurs vraiment à s'engager dans le maintien des arbres dans les systèmes, c'est d'abord pour leurs propres besoins. Que les producteurs comprennent que ce qu'il est en train de faire, c'est pour son besoin. Donc, et aussi pour les besoins de son environnement avant tout. Sinon, si tout est orienté vers des questions économiques, je pense qu'à quelque part, nous risquons vraiment de perdre vraiment les pédales. Donc, il faut nécessairement que ça se table vraiment sur les besoins du producteur. Donc, parce que les arbres que nous introduisons, c'est pour la diversification. Donc, ils peuvent trouver leur compte dans le processus de diversification, pas nécessairement dans le commerce équitable vraiment du cacao. Ils peuvent vraiment, à partir de ce qu'ils font, diversifier, pouvoir vraiment vendre autre chose que le cacao en tant que produit. Merci.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Vous voulez ajouter quelque chose ou bien?
Bon, je crois qu'il a fini, mais un petit élément, c'est vrai, c'est basé sur les motivations économiques sur le long terme, c'est ce que le Dr Kwame a dit dans son intervention. À partir du moment où on demande aux paysans de faire des efforts supplémentaires ou adopter de nouvelles pratiques, il faut que le cacao qui est issu de cette adoption de pratique-là ait un prix relativement incitatif. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Donc avec cette dernière intervention, on clôt la session d'intervention des participants. Avant de faire la clôture finale, je tiens à rappeler quelques éléments pratiques. Alors, donc, on va faire une photo de famille des panélistes. C'est la presse qui le demande. Et on me demande aussi de vous informer qu'après cette session, il y a un cocktail qui est derrière la salle. Je ne sais pas où est derrière, là, si c'est là où... Voilà, il y a un cocktail. Donc ceux qui ont l'intention de partir, on leur demande d'attendre juste un peu. Et Alors, on demande aussi à ce que les participants laissent le casque sur les tables avant de partir. Souvent, par inadvertance, on prend ça, on pense que c'est son portable. On s'en va avec. Donc, mettez-les sur la table quand vous avez fini. Ok, donc, alors, je pense qu'on va rapidement essayer d'aller à la conclusion de cette séance avant de libérer les gens. Donc, on a entendu ici les interventions de plusieurs acteurs qui interviennent sur la question de la fertilisation des sols dégradés. On a entendu on peut les appeler les autorités, ceux qui définissent les grandes politiques, les grandes orientations. On a entendu les techniciens, on a entendu les acteurs qui sont sur le terrain. Donc on a entendu presque tous les intervenants de la chaîne des valeurs. Et ce que moi j'ai pu retenir de tous ces débats comme challenge qu'on pourrait transformer en plan d'action, c'est d'abord, est-ce qu'on peut être ensemble si ça vous dérange pas?
Merci beaucoup.
Donc j'ai retenu que vraiment il y a une nécessité de mieux définir, sinon de renforcer le cadre institutionnel qui puisse permettre qu'il y ait des échanges et qui puisse favoriser la synergie.
So we'd like to favor synergy among actions. I was able to retain that many initiatives have been carried out on the ground, and these initiatives must be integrated, let's say intertwined, and this must the dynamic synergy to be adopted by the actors on the ground. And this must reach the lowest level, the integrated approach on the project, how did you name it? The terroir approach, which integrates the most relevant stakeholders in the implementation of the projects. And the involvement of the different farmers in these initiatives is a necessity. We have seen that there are many constraints. We have some justified resistance, which must be lifted through trainings and support and capacity building, because the ground question is the revenue. How agroforestry, whether it is in the cocoa farming sector, what benefit, what is the benefit that I'm getting? Because I'm ready to fight for the deforestation, to fight against deforestation. I'm ready to combat desertification, but what am I earning as benefit? It is true that we have to find a compromise.
Viable pour eux. J'ai aussi retenu qu'il y a un besoin de soutenir l'innovation, parce que c'est la recherche qui offre les solutions, et aux solutions qui pourraient par la suite être mises à l'échelle. Et justement, le dernier point que j'ai retenu, c'est vraiment ce besoin de mettre à l'échelle les innovations qui existent déjà et qui, à travers différents projets, pourraient aider à restaurer dans un délai raisonnable les sols dégradés sous cacaoyère en Côte d'Ivoire. Je pense avoir fait l'économie des choses. Sur ce, je vous remercie et je remets le tablier à M. Christophe Kwame pour la suite des événements. Vers la clôture.
Ah, c'est toi qui as ouvert. Je voulais dire merci à tout le monde. On va donc mettre fin à cette session et souhaiter que nous puissions nous tous nous retrouver au cocktail pour échanger 2 à 2, 3 à 3 sur le point de compréhension. Je vous remercie tous.